Hi, I'm Bob Vila. Welcome home again. We've got an exciting day planned today. A double window's being installed in my kitchen that's going to give us a fabulous view of the backyard. Also a door that's all made out of glass panes. I'm taking you out to Stockbridge, Massachusetts to visit a house known as Naumkeag. It was designed by McKim, Mead & White around the same time as this house, but really on a much grander scale. And then when we come back here, we'll be showing you how to put the plaster over the Blueboard. Stick around. It's good to have you home again.
Bob Vila's home again.
Fenestration is a fancy word for window placement on the facades of a house. If you think about a classic cape, it always has a center door flanked by two pairs of windows. If you think about a shingle style house, it pretty much is a different animal. Architects approached the whole issue of window placement at random almost. And if you look at this house on the right hand side right over here, we've got a pair of windows that doesn't really match the other pair of windows below it. And what we've designed for the kitchen corner of the house is again an oversized pair of windows right next to what would be called a French door, I guess. And this is so that we have lots and lots and lots of daylight coming into the kitchen area. And when you see it in reality here, you'll get to understand it. One thing that the architects were concerned about was keeping that shingled skin of the house uninterrupted, kind of, not too many shadow lines. Hi, Riley.
Hi, Bob.
Hi, Danny. How are you doing?
Hi, Bob.
So are we painting the window, I see? Isn't that a little bit premature?
Well, we're just back priming the sill, which we've just put on.
Okay.
And we want to make sure that everything that goes up against the house is going to be pre-primed to seal it.
And this is an alcohol-based primer that dries in about
Dries
5
real
or 10
quick.
minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
Now tell me about this window, Riley. This is a double Marvin window. It's a custom item, right?
That's right. It's a thermopane window. It has applied muttons to give it that true divided look.
Yeah.
It's custom to fit our opening. This isn't a stock window.
Yeah. Let's look at the one behind you that's already been installed here.
Right.
Because it's an unusual installation. It's an unusual design, right?
It is. What we're trying to do is duplicate what was here at the very beginning.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, what they've done is given us a window with the jambs have been flush all the way around. Then we applied the casings in this very rugged sill.
Yeah.
And it's flush surface here from the
This is what's
sheathing to the
interesting,
casing.
right? The casing and the sheathing are flush, so that when you put the skin back on.
Well, what we're going to do is, on top of this, we'll put this applied molding.
Yeah.
And
But
then,
the architect was really thinking about keeping water out, making sure the shingles kept the water out, so that when the shingles come back on, they cover over this joint in between the sheathing and the casing.
Correct.
It's a very nice detail.
It's very time consuming too.
It's very time consuming, yeah. All right, well, while you guys get ready to bring that up in place, let's look at the inside of the kitchen here so that we can understand that in order to create fenestration like this, you have to first think about structure. And up above, you can see that we had to replace much of the structure in this area of the house because it was damaged, had been cut up. And we have a built-up engineered beam that goes across the whole span from here back to that point. It's broken. The span is broken by a post here and another post here. So there's a series of 3 short spans. But look what happens over here, okay? You got that sitting right here with nothing underneath it. And what's happening is that another engineered piece of lumber is helping all this load transfer itself down to here and come down this post all the way to the foundation. That makes it possible to really have an opening that's almost 10 feet interrupted right here, but it makes it possible for it structurally to work out just fine. So are we ready to bring the window into place?
I believe we are, yeah. You all set, Dan?
Yeah, ready to
Okay.
go.
Now you've done some of this work already. You've already got shims in place and you've dry fitted it, right?
Yes, we have, yeah. So it should go right in.
Now Riley, when you're putting
It's got to go back to about 1 inch.
There we go.
Back to you.
Back to me.
Okay.
Tight.
Good.
Okay. Because the casing butts up against the other casing, and that's the detail. There's no shingling in between the windows.
Right, but the key to installing these windows is being sure that the shims are underneath the horns of the window, because that's what's carrying
Let's look at that
the
from the
weight.
inside.
Okay.
The horns of the window are the structural part of the window right here.
That's right.
It comes right there.
And this is what's going to be carrying the weight. And once we nail it into the frame and the headers all the way around. We want to be sure that we get some space in here so that the insulators can come behind us and tuck some insulation in there loosely. If this is too tight, they'll have a tendency to jam it in, and that will cause the window to not open.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a very important point. If they put too much in there and the window gets jammed up, you'll have trouble operating it. What about the header, though? Do you put the window straight up against the header up there?
No, the header is just carrying the weight of the beam and everything above. It is not anything structural for the window. If we tried to do that when the header started moving around, which it's going to do eventually, it may damage the window.
Yeah,
so.
you have less likelihood of the structural lumber moving on you if it's an engineered piece of wood like this is.
True.
But if it's a regular dimensional 2x12, say, it might shrink, it might move, and if there is movement between that and the window, you might have some cracked glass, right?
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
Boy, the door is really nice too, isn't it? One thing I love about this type of door is that the hardware has a shaft and a bolt so that when you close it, it actually throws a bolt right in at the bottom of the sill where you see the striker plate down here and another one at the top. So you have a very, very tight, tight lockup. Okay, and that's all there is to it, right? Just driving the nails through, and then we'll apply the moldings and we'll get the shingling all done. Nice job, fellas.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to have to break for some messages, and when we come back, we'll be in Stockbridge, Massachusetts, in the beautiful Berkshire Mountains, visiting Naumkeag, a most unusual house. Stick around. We'll be touring Naumkeag with its curator, Mark Baer, and I guess the first question is, what does Naumkeag mean?
It's a Native American Indian word. It's actually the Naumkeag Indians lived in what is now Salem, where Mr. Choate, the builder, grew up.
I see. So he named it after his hometown, or the Indians from his hometown area.
Right. That's right.
But Mr. Choate was a wealthy New York attorney, right?
He was an attorney for over 60 years. He was also ambassador to England at the turn of the century.
A man of note. And he commissioned one of the most famous architects of the late 19th century.
Stanford White,
Yeah.
of McKim, Mead and White.
Okay.
And they designed a terrific country home.
Which is really a shingle style home, right?
That's correct. And use of a lot of local material, wood on the dormers, coving. You've got replication of design elements, the dentation of the copper gutters running along in horizontal lines.
The little
shingle.
sawtooth that you see in the gutter, which is picking up on the sawtooth that he's got on the shingles all around, yeah.
That's correct.
But when you look at the sides of the gable ends, it's almost like fish scales going up and down the sides there.
You've also got the way the roof line curves up into the dormers and out, a very flowing line.
You know, that's really, for a house that says wants to be a cottage, that's a very sophisticated looking dormer up there. It almost looks like something off of a French castle.
That's true. That's true.
Now, the idea with these houses was to be unpretentious, right?
That's correct. It was a place to come to from the city to escape the city heat in the summertime and to relax, and the Choates did that, usually from May to October.
And we chose to start our tour by looking at this western facade, which is the side of the house that the family would have enjoyed. You've got the terrace there and the covered
Bringing their
porch.
guests out, a place to relax in the afternoon to watch the sunset.
Exactly,
and
this
enjoy their
incredible
cocktails.
vista of the Berkshire Hills. But let's walk around now so that we can take a look at the facade that presented itself to the visitor, right?
Where people came in, that's right.
So you come to this side of the house and it's a totally different design.
That's right. We moved away from the shingle style on the west side to a Norman style castle.
How do you explain that?
Well, Stanford White, the architect, had just returned from his honeymoon when he designed this house, and he had toured through European Norman keeps, English manor halls, so he's bringing those ideas here to the Choates' home.
So he convinces them to kind of switch gears in midstream and do this very formal facade, although it's not that formal. I mean, the roof almost reads like a thatched roof.
That's true, harking back to England.
Yeah.
And you've got what was originally wood shake to give that heavy roof and those flowing lines.
And native stone combined with brick throughout. And of course, a very beautiful and welcoming entryway.
All of which combines to a place to welcome guests in, facing the roadside.
What a door.
Solid oak with bronze trimmings.
Perfect. So this is the central hall and the staircase. I love the red in here. Isn't this great?
This carpet that the family used.
Yeah.
Plus, it's all hand-carved American oak. The balusters and railings leading up to the arched windows actually stretches all the way to the third floor. And not only is it beautiful and sculptural, but it's functional. It allows air to pass through the house and warm summer evenings.
Yeah,
keep the
no, but
house
the
cool.
detailing is so exciting because it's the Gilded Age. It's a wealthy family from the city coming to the country, but they're bringing with them the high style of New York. I mean, the turnings on the oaken balusters and the paneling throughout.
That's true.
Tell us about the overmantel here. Is that also oak?
It is, all that intricate carving of the smoke hood combined with the false ceiling beams, giving the sense of an English country home.
Yeah. And again, the architect has just come back from touring Norman England and France, and his mind is full of these details.
Those things, that's right.
Are those the original andirons?
Yes, finished off in New York City. Actually, and these tools, such heavy weight,
Yeah.
but again, giving that sense of the fireplace where
Yeah.
guests would be welcome to.
So the plan of the house seems to be relatively cozy.
It's all right here. You come in through the front door, guests are welcomed in, and the main rooms. Here, the dining room off to the right.
Yeah. It's sumptuous, but the scale of it is
Somewhat intimate.
it's intimate, yeah.
It's
And
a
the
comfortable
colors
room.
are interesting. Now, is this really 1880s?
Well, it's a combination of 1880s, Stanford White's work with the table and chairs, the paneling, the carving around the mantel. Then the daughter, Mabel Choate, inherits the house in 1929, and she makes some changes. The fabric on the wall, the gold fabric, which was her addition, plus a lot of the furnishings brought in.
The sideboard looks like early 19th century.
That's 1810 from New York City,
Okay.
that flame mahogany.
And it's really perfect in this room. And then the collection of blue and white porcelain throughout. Tell us a little bit about the walls and the ceiling. They're very unusual.
They are. The grass paper was put in by Mabel Choate, the daughter. This is Japanese grass paper.
Okay.
The tin ceiling, though, is from Stanford White's time. It's part of his addition to the house.
And what is the point of a tin reflection?
Reflecting candlelight at dinner time. Remember, no electricity when the house is built.
Yeah.
Candlelight to light the house up for dinner.
Marvelous. What's behind that incredible tooled leather screen there in the corner?
That leads into the butler's pantry, the serving room for the house. It's completely furnished down to the last teacup, as is the rest of the house. All of that's here today because of the generosity of Mabel Choate, the Choate's daughter, who left the house to the trustees of reservations upon her death in 1958.
So the house is open in the summer?
That's right, May to October.
Fabulous. All right, now what's across the hall?
That leads into the library.
And it looks like an everyday cozy room, doesn't it?
It is. It was a place to gather in the afternoon. Mabel Choate would have her friends in for tea, a place to read any of the first edition murder mysteries,
Yeah.
and a place to relax.
Now she lived here until the 1950s, you said.
That's right. So she was living in the house for over 70 years, and during that time she's putting together her collection of over 500 pieces of Chinese export porcelain.
Wow.
As one example of the collecting that she did while at Naumkeag.
So that's something that's scattered about the entire house.
You'll find it everywhere.
Yeah. And yet you got the murder mysteries from the 30s and the 40s right in this room.
Yeah, first editions.
Beautiful mahogany paneling in here. Great fireplace. And then what's the other side is the more formal room, is it?
Right, the adjoining drawing room or formal sitting room.
Oh,
And
yes,
As
yeah.
you can see, a place guests would gather here in the afternoon or
Pretty
even
sumptuous room.
well, certainly as a place to entertain your guests after dinner.
Is that Waterford?
It is, Waterford Crystal.
And the rug looks like an Aubusson from France?
French Aubusson.
All the best things, right?
That's it.
Okay, just like New York transplanted. Martin, thanks for the tour.
Thanks, Bob.
Stick around. We'll be right back after these messages. Okay, we're up on the third floor, and I'm going to interrupt our plastering contractor in a minute, but let's look at what's already been done. This is a vast room. It's about 24 by 28. It's a large room, and it has a cathedral ceiling. And when you're doing a room like this, if you're going to attempt to hang your own drywall or blueboard, be careful. But I mean, it makes a lot of sense, first of all, to pay attention to the direction that the strapping is in. Our strapping, which are the pieces of wood that are attached to the actual roof rafters, are horizontal like this. So that means that you want to put your blueboard or your drywall in the opposite direction, perpendicular to those lines, so that you get lots of nailing. And then the other thing that you want to keep in mind is that the larger the board that you use, the fewer cracks that you're going to have down the line, the fewer seams that you're going to have to fill. And here we've got 12-foot sections, 4 by 12-foot sheets of blueboard that come down and make it a much quicker and easier job. Then the detailing. If you've got openings such as here where we have a skylight, this is absolutely the most important thing that you have to put in, the corner bead, because this is going to assure you neat, crisp corners. But then wherever you have sheets butting together, they come with a factory edge, and you see that there's actually an indentation on each one of these factory edges. And the reason that is there is so that you can put tape over it and so that you can rough in or put in a first coat like he's doing over here, which will give you a much stronger joint in between those sheets. But Carlos Londoño, our plastering contractor, who's from Ecuador, but
Yes.
lives here in Cambridge, I want to interrupt you now because, first of all, this always looks so simple when you're just, let me see you, how you're putting it on. I mean, right off the hod, effortless, right?
A little bit, yes.
It looks effortless. But the fact of the matter is that it takes a lot of skill, and if you've really never tried it before, keep in mind that if you do it wrong, you've ruined it. Let's talk about the plaster first, Carlos. What is the type of plaster that you're using?
We're using a Unical base, which is mixed only with water. The minute that you add the water, you have about an hour to 1 hour, 20 minutes.
And after about an hour, you have
Becomes
this,
a rock.
which is
Yes.
otherwise known as garbage.
Yep.
Okay, so you've got to be quick and
Yes.
fast. Let's watch you load up that hot.
Okay. You normally want to take just enough so you don't spill it all over the place. And
And let's just watch him go.
I guess it's something that it's in your wrist. That with time you get to use your trowel a little better.
About how thick are you laying it on?
It's about an eighth of an inch.
About an eighth of an inch.
Yes.
Okay. All right, it's my turn.
Okay.
Can I borrow what's
Sure.
already on there? Now, the part of it that I can never get right is this part of it, loading it on. How can you tell that you're putting on the right thickness, Carlos?
Well, as you can see, you know, you are over there, you're good, and over here, a little less the amount. But
And do you
you
have
try
work-
to lay it on in a way that it's even around, because you have to come back again to go over it and start knocking it down.
Okay, I'll let you do that. Load it up.
So eventually,
Okay, so you don't want to be bashful. You want to put a good amount.
yes, because
On
you
the
gotta
trowel.
go back to the wall about 4 times by the time the wall is hard. So you actually remove some of it off.
Okay. And then once you've got it on, you have to wait how long before you can start steel troweling?
Well, normally a person like myself will do a couple walls, and then as soon as I'm done with it, I would come back again, and I would start to just going over it again, and you start taking out all the impurities that you left the first time around.
Okay, so you come back and hit it a second time while it's still workable,
While it's
still malleable.
still wet, yes. And then your third time, you would add water, because the mix starts to get hard as we continue
As
on.
time goes by, sure.
So on the next one, you would come back and you throw lightly water over it, and you would do the same thing over again.
Okay.
So you go 4 times over the work that you have laid on.
Okay, Carlos, get to it. We don't want to lose the room.
Thank
We've
you.
got a break for messages. Don't go away. And that wraps things up for this week, but come home again next time. We're going to be doing more work up here on the 3rd floor, giving you a few hints on how you do the finished carpentry work. Out in the front yard, we'll be digging a trench to bring in a conduit for a new electrical service and a new water pipe. That's it. Till next time, I'm Bob Vila. It's good to have you home again.